Beekeeping for about a dozen years now. And I'll preface my research presentation in that it's unique. It was not done in conjunction with another university. I'll show you, I became very intrigued on this concept in studying and going through the master beekeeping process. And way back when, with Lance Wilson and Mary Reed, had discussed doing this as my research project. And you'll see I ended up ultimately going through the SARE program and received a grant to do this study. But that's kind of the premise. So I'll jump into it. It's my research was on the two-queen system. I don't know how many of you are familiar with two-queen systems or how they work. So I'll walk you through why I've been spending time researching multiple queen hives. I'll go over the pros and cons of the multiple queen hives and kind of provide you a history of how they've evolved and what concepts have been tried and why isn't this an accepted standard in our industry. I'll give you multiple examples, and then I'll share with you the new designs that I've come up with, and you're welcome after the presentation to come up and take a closer look at those. Then I'll share my research methodology and the final results and summary. So as I said, when I was going through the Master Beekeeping program, I was very intrigued by this research that was done by C.L. Farrar way back in the 1930s. His findings were published in 1937, and Farrar started out by saying two ultimate objectives form the basis of the beekeeper's business, namely the production of a crop and the conversion of that crop into money. The amount of honey produced per colony has an even greater significance in determining profits than the market value received for the honey. He said the average beekeeper is not obtaining maximum production per colony at any particular season. So his whole study was based on looking at what the impact of bee population within a colony had on the actual honey production. So that's the premise of this research, trying to see if that's a valid concept and how two queen hives can impact honey production. So in Farrar's research, found it very interesting. He said one colony with 60,000 bees will probably produce 1.54 times as much honey as four colonies, each with 15,000 bees. One colony with 45,000 bees will probably produce 1.48 times as much honey as colonies with 15,000 bees. And then a single colony with 30,000 bees would produce 1.36 times the amount of honey as two colonies that each had 15,000 bees. So based on the bee population within that colony, he was seeing a range of potential increase anywhere from the 36% up to 54%, which I thought was just amazing. I mean, that's one thing we strive for is the honey production. And it was just intrigued me to find out what the actual bee population, what that impact could be on your honey production. So I started to do research. Obviously, if you have two queens in one colony, they're going to produce faster. You have the opportunity for a larger bee population. So why hasn't that concept caught on? I don't know very many people who are actually operating under that method currently for all their hives. A lot of people I've talked to have tried it. They've all had varying degrees of success. So in doing my research, there's a number of pros and cons. So the pros, potential for a larger colony population, which therefore leads to that increased honey production. And then with the larger population, it reduces the susceptibility to pests such as wax moths and small hive beetles. And then also in multiple queen colonies, you have that redundancy factor. So if one queen is lost, you're not necessarily losing that colony. They can rely on the other queen until the second queen is replaced. Now the cons. And obviously in most people's minds, the cons have outweighed the pros because they haven't switched over to this system. So historically, multiple queen hive configurations often utilize non-standard equipment. So all of us have, a lot of money and time invested in standard products, and it's tough to switch. So that's a big reason. Historically, multiple queen hive configurations have often required more labor to maintain and manage. And as we go through some of the examples I'll share with you, you can see how that comes into play. And then finally, historically, multiple queen hive configuration options for commercial migratory beekeepers have been extremely limited or non-existent. In doing my research, I wasn't able to find any examples that were geared toward the migratory beekeeper where you could put multiple queen hive onto pallets. So just a quick kind of a background in hive designs. You know, it was way back in 1852, so over 170 years ago, that Langstroth was given his patent with the removable frames and foundation and that magic 3/8 inch bee space. You know, it's amazing to me in our day and time when we see changes happening so rapidly that our gold standard is still based on a design that's over 170 years old. 1892, this was the first recorded case that I could find of an attempt to do a multiple queen hive. It was done by George Wells, and he took two single deep boxes side by side and spanned them with a queen excluder and added the honey supers on top. And then the next kind of milestone date I've got here is 1946. That's when Farrar himself, after conducting his research and seeing the importance of or the impact that bee population has on honey production, he came up with a multi-hive concept that I'll share with you as well. And then the last one I've got noted here is 1953. A gentleman by the name of Gauguet developed a 3-queen pyramid. So his thinking, well, if 2 queens are good, 3 have got to be better. So it was kind of a unique approach, but it never really caught on widely. Now, in doing my research, I found this book by Alan Wade. It's a great resource for anyone who wants to do additional study on this topic. And he had done kind of a historical analysis, and I'm going to use images, some graphics on the next few slides taken from his book. So in terms of the concept of 2 queen hives, there are 2 basic approaches. One being a horizontal method, and that's represented by the graphic on the left, and the other being the purely vertical approach. So the horizontal, you can see, gets its name. You've got the 2 queen boxes, QA and QB, at that bottom tier, placed horizontally. And what they're doing here is adding a queen excluder that covers half of each of those boxes. Then the honey supers are stacked on top. So, you know, the advantage on that, you're getting the 2 queens producing early in the season, so you're building up that bee population, which is great for production. But in this scenario, you're still limited overall to 20 deep frames of brood production. So once that maxes out, you know, you reach some limitation. You're also having to come up with specialized equipment. If you look at those queen boxes, those inner covers and the telescoping covers are non-standard pieces. So it becomes difficult to keep that hive weatherproof. And then again, another drawback, we get into the labor involved with it, going that vertical with the honey supers and then having to remove all of those boxes just to check on the health of the queen boxes themselves. Now, the second method, the purely vertical, is the one on the right. The pros on that one, you're using all standard equipment, the boxes and frames. You're using queen excluders, and then you're also able to increase, in this scenario, the actual brood frame space that's available. In this scenario, you see 3 deep boxes, so you'd have a total of the 30 frames. Now, the one thing, it didn't go into a lot of detail as to when those queen excluders were introduced and what kind of issues they had with trying to maintain both queens, because obviously you're going to be able to have those queens come in direct contact with each other. So, but the concept being you're circulating the queen pheromone from both queens and getting acceptance to create a larger population, kind of a super workforce. So the image on the left, that was the one that was first developed by Wells. He used a simple wood divider and just drilled holes in it to allow the queen pheromones to be distributed within that box. And then, like I said earlier, he used a double wide queen excluder. And then the downside, you know, he's got non-standard honey supers placed above. So the older I get, looking at a 20 frame honey super out in the field would make my back hurt already. So, and then the far right example, that's the Gauguin one, where he thought it would be even better to do the 3 queen boxes. So he had A, B, and C on that bottom tier, going in with a shared queen excluders, and then doing a pyramid with the honey supers. So, downside, you're looking at specialized equipment again, and then having to unstack all of those supers in the field to really monitor the health of the queen boxes themselves. Now, this was Farrar's approach. It said, after he had determined the impact of honey production based on colony bee population size, he was very intrigued by it and wanted to come up with a multiple queen hive system. So this graph represents the development of his colony. The far left diagram is early spring. He's using a single queen, kind of a traditional approach. And then he introduced a second queen, and during the summer months, just separated those by the queen excluder and stacked all the honey supers on top. So you can see the upside on his, again, he's using all standard equipment. You can vary the amount of brood capacity available within that colony, but it becomes so labor intensive out in the field to have to do all that unstacking. So what he did then at the end of the season, you'll see he had a queue old and a queue new. So at the end of the season, he eliminated the old queen and just ended up with the new queen for overwintering. And then this is an interesting approach as well. It's actually referred to as a coffin design, because it placed the 3 queen boxes again in a horizontal configuration, but then went even worse than the 20 frame hive super, went to a 30 frame super and stacked on top of that. So you're dealing with really unwieldy honey supers, plus the fact that it's all customized boxes that would be required. So after doing all of that research, in my mind, in order for this to work for most beekeepers, number one, it has to utilize equipment that's readily available. And then also, it can't be a system or an approach that makes the labor more intensive and more difficult. Because no matter how much honey we harvest, if it just becomes too difficult in the field to manage the system, it doesn't make sense. We're going to stick with what we've got. So that was kind of the driver behind my thought process on this. So I mentioned earlier, I've actually submitted for a SARE grant. I had never heard of the SARE grants before, and I think it was through an ABF article, or perhaps even the Texas Beekeepers Association Journal became aware of it. And so this was my first try at submitting a grant. I'm an architect by trade, so had never dealt in the grant world. And fortunately, I was given the grant. So in that grant, I had to come up with my problem statement, what my research was trying to prove or resolve. So beekeeping operations of all sizes throughout the United States are facing challenges related to colony losses and the impact those losses have on overall honey production. Approximately 1/3 of all foods available in our local grocery stores rely on pollinators. Honeybees contribute over $15 billion each year to the value of U.S. crops. Without the bees, U.S. would lose 100% of almond, 90% of apple, 90% of blueberry, 90% of cucumber, 80% of cherry, and 70% of watermelon crops. Over the last decade, beekeepers have experienced an alarming increase in colony losses. A nationwide survey revealed 1.6 million colonies lost, with commercial beekeepers reporting an average loss of 62% between June of 2024 and March of 2025. A recent study by Bee Informed Partnership identified varroa mites as the leading cause of colony losses, followed closely by queen issues. Regarding the colony losses due to queen issues, the Bee Informed Partnership study stated, while the queen issue like dearth or poor health can lead to the loss of the bee colony, there are several possible interventions. For example, colony losses can sometimes be prevented by providing a queenless colony with a queen or by actively replacing a queen with a younger one. In order to replace lost colonies, beekeepers must generate colony splits. These splits, in effect, cut the population of the existing hive in half in order to start the new replacement colony. The new replacement colony formed off of the split of the existing then needs additional time to generate a new queen, or the beekeeper has the option of supplying a mated queen. Therefore, beekeeper loses either time or money in generating a replacement colony. In addition, the reduction in bee population of the original colony has an adverse effect on that colony's honey production as well. And then this was my proposed solution. Going into, when I first started looking at the requirements and what I saw as potential solutions, I identified very quickly that most likely it would require two separate solutions, one for the commercial or migratory beekeepers. And I'll let you come up and ask questions and look at these later, but this is the migratory example. And then one geared more for hobby beekeepers. And really the driving factor migratory-wise is something that's still being able to be utilized, put on pallets for transportation. So that was kind of the driver between the two designs. Let's see. So my proposed solution, my new beehive design for small-scale beekeepers, that received a U.S. patent on May 13th of this year. The design allows for the use of two solid panel dividers that allow the two separate bee nukes, each with their own queen, to initially develop within a common hive. So this is the example of the hobby one. And really, you start out, if you're building up a nuke on either side, there's a solid panel divider, so you can control the number of frames that are open to the colony for production, so you're not overwhelming them with all that void space. And then as the nukes build out, you remove this divider, and they're allowed, in the center, there's a double screen board that separates the two colonies as they develop. So in effect, what you're creating here is an overall colony that has 30 deep frames plus 8 medium frames for brood production. And then going back, for this hobby hive design, this is the only unique piece of equipment, is this base. You may be wondering why the step down here occurs, and that's really to allow for the use of standard covers, inner covers, and telescoping covers. So this, again, is the only unique piece of equipment. It's sitting on standard bottom boards, so you build up that system. So as the two colonies develop, you've got that total brood capacity availability, and then the honey super stack here. Place the horizontal queen excluder off the top, and that allows the worker bees from both sides, both colonies, to intermix and create that one super colony organism. Let's see, I won't go through all of the verbiage. I think it's easier just to explain it looking at the examples up here. And then an advantage, for the hobby beekeeper in mentoring other beekeepers, I found, they become very discouraged if it's intense labor, opening up the hives and really checking on the health of the colony. So this approach found very beneficial in that you're not having to constantly unstack supers to check or to treat the queens. You can check, very simply opening these up and looking at them and going through the frames and leaving the honey supers basically independent. So I think that's a big advantage that encourages, beginner beekeepers. So here I've kind of walked you through operationally how this functions. This was one of the patent drawings that was submitted. That center dash line represents the location of the double screen board. So you can see, both colonies would circulate, or both queens would circulate the queen pheromone that becomes common to both sides and allows that unified workforce to develop. This is a cutaway up above that you can see showing the location of the double screen board, and then those two step downs where the solid panels occur. So you're limiting the number of open frames during initial nuke development, and then expanding out as those nukes get filled, or as the frames get filled in. And then that's the placement of the horizontal queen excluder that allows workers from both sides to intermingle. And then again, kind of the magic of that configuration of the box, you're still maintaining that 3/8" B space between all of the frames within that colony to encourage that development horizontally. And you can see it sits on two standard bottom boards. Now, mentioned earlier, developed a second system as well for the migratory guys. So a new queen beehive designed for commercial beekeepers is patent pending. I should have that by the end of this year. Definitely, it could be as early as tomorrow. So pollination services generate a large percentage of many commercial beekeepers' income. Therefore, it's imperative that the industry standard 2 hive-wide configuration for stacking on pallets be maintained for transportation purposes. The new 2-queen horizontal beehive base that I've designed for commercial beekeepers provides a 2-wide configuration that is compatible with industry standard pallets for transportation. And then it also utilizes, there's a removable panel in this box as well. So initially you start off with again a solid panel divider that both sides build up. Once they're built up, then you go to a double screen board to allow those queen pheromones to circulate. After that's occurred, I usually allow about a week for that to happen. Come back in and replace that with a queen excluder, a vertical queen excluder that fits in that same slot. And then that allows the worker bees from both sides to migrate between the two boxes. And then this one is just built up traditionally like a standard Langstroth configuration, or much the same that the commercial guys currently are using. So you can see there are similar concepts behind it. The idea being let that queen pheromone from both sides circulate, have a common workforce. Therefore, you're building up that larger force of the bee population to look at the increase that they then produce in the honey production. So these were some of the patent drawings for the commercial system. Again, I was able to maintain, there is one medium deep frame in this box. It just makes up, if you think in terms of the double wide boxes, you're losing 1.5 inches for the common sides of the two boxes. So that's where the vertical panel plus one medium deep frame occur. And then that's covered and held in place by a separation board. That's got the detail of how that panel system works, and then showing how it sits on a standard pallet itself. So as I mentioned, I was awarded a SAR grant to look at this. And these are the methodology, the research steps that the steps that I used in my research. So my basic concept was I was going to use 3 of these configurations, 3 of these for a total of 6 colonies of each, and then use 6 standard Langstroth double deeps as a control group in my apiary. And then the first year, because I started with all 5 frame nukes, let them build up for 1 year. And then the second year is when I measured the actual honey production. It basically walks through all of those. And then when I'll show you the array that was set up, I distributed the 3 different colony types. They were distributed equally across the array in the apiary so that no one colony type had an advantage in the field. In terms of feeding, all of the colonies and all 18 colonies were provided same access to supplemental feedings, protein patties, and sugar syrup. And based on mite loads, if determined that medication was needed, then all 18 colonies were treated similarly. I monitored the condition of all 18 colonies, and I can show you on my iPad. I used a great software called B+, And I went through and monitored for the presence of eggs, the queen, the larva, cap brood, laying pattern, colony condition, activity level, temperament. And I actually went through and did a frame-by-frame count in these colonies to track, brood frames, honey frames, open frames, and frames that were just comb. And then at the end of the nectar flow, I harvested all honey from all 18 colonies, and then did a comparison of the average amount of honey produced by the 3 different colony types. So this graphic was submitted as part of the SARE grant, and what this is showing is the layout within my apiary. You see, for instance, in the upper left-hand corner, those in the 09 series represented the location of the migratory hives. And then in the center, the 03 number series were the hobby hive locations. And the 04 series were the locations of the standard Langstroth hives. So you can see that they're kind of distributed equally throughout the array. Again, I didn't want to provide any potential advantage due to location as it may impact the honey production. And underneath each of the colonies, it's actually the final honey amounts of honey that was harvested. And I'll share that data a little more thoroughly here in a minute. So that was a photo of the actual apiary layout of the different hive configurations that were used in the field. So this, I know I've got a sample of it here that you can look at. The data is small, but this represents the numbers that were collected based on all those data points that I listed in that previous slide. So it's number of hives or number of frames of each type of, whether it be brood or honey or pollen, and then it recorded a number of different variables in the field, the condition of the queen, the temperament of the colony, also recorded feedings that were given or any medication. So at the end of the study, I ended up with 18 of these, one slide for each of the colonies within the study. And then this was the final honey harvest results. Now what I did, I extracted honey, all the capped honey from all of the colonies. That was kind of the criteria. I didn't go in and weigh, but if the frames consisted of capped honey, I drew them, harvested them, and then separated them out, in the field to track them per type of colony. So I found this very interesting. You see the first bullet point was for the Langstroth colonies. Now, during the process, I did have one Langstroth colony that had died, didn't make it through honey flow. And so in order not to skew the honey numbers, because that's what I was looking at in this study, not the impact necessarily of multiple queen hives on survival of the colonies, but more just the honey production. So I just took the total amount of honey that was produced in the Langstroth colonies and divided that by 5, because that was the actual number of producing colonies. And I came up with an average of 13.76 pounds. And then go down the second bullet point for the 6 new 2-queen commercial, the migratory hives. They produced 151 pounds of honey, and their average was 25 pounds per colony. So that represented an increase of over 83% as compared to the Langstroth hives that were in that same apiary used for the study. Now the 6 new 2-queen colony hobby hives produced 118 pounds of honey, and that was an average of just under 20 pounds. So that increase represented an increase of over 43% as compared to the Langstroth hives. So that goes back, I don't know if you recall from Farrar's study, he had predicted, the 36 to 54% range and increased in honey production. So that falls, very closely within that range. So the conclusions drawn from the research, my initial findings do show multiple queen hives have the potential to increase honey production. Now, I realize that in order to gain widespread acceptance in the industry, there are a number of hurdles, but I think it's worth pursuing. Obviously we have to make them more user-friendly. which I hope was accomplished, by the hobby hive. And then also make them where they're not increasing the amount of labor involved, because beekeeping is hard enough. We don't want to make things more difficult in the field. But I think, additional study is needed. I think it has the potential. Obviously, my sample size of 18 total colonies, that's a drop in the bucket. So I'd love to see more samples done, but I think it's a concept worth pursuing. So, and I think it has a great potential for beekeepers across the board, from hobby beekeepers to commercial producers. So I'll open it up for questions, or feel free to come up and take a closer look at the hive configurations.
Can you go back one slide? For your Langstroth, you only had 5 colonies?
Yes, I said one had died out before honey harvest. So in order not to skew that number, I mean, actually, if I had factored that in, those percentage increases would have been even higher. But I wanted to look at it purely in surviving colonies that did produce honey. So I took that one out of the equation. Yes, ma'am.
Did you take any genetics into consideration for this, or how did you?
No, I didn't. I went to a queen breeder that I had been using, and made sure that the 18 initial Nooks that I had purchased from him came from the same queen stock. So that's the only degree that I took the genetics into account, tried to keep that consistent. I wasn't trying to factor in or anything else into the equation. Yes, ma'am.
On the hobbyist model, was there any delay in those bees building out in that box in between?
No, I mean, they did obviously start, from the far edge, kind of centered out, and went to, I kept feeders on the outside edge of both of those. And it did take some time, but they did reach that point and build out. So, and it was, I haven't done the horizontal hive configurations before, so this is my first attempt at it. So it did, in all honesty, it appeared that it took more time than strictly going vertical, but they still ended up out producing, the double deep Langstroth hives. Does that answer your question? Okay. Yes, sir.
So you did use frame feeders and.
Yes, I did. So I used the deep frame feeders, the 2-gallon feeders, in all of the colonies. So they had equal access to sugar syrup. I used a 1-to-1 ratio and pollen paddings. Yes.
In integrating the workers, what consideration did you put into, actually letting them come into contact? Is that from the research from the books that you read? Timeliness.
In terms of how long the double screen board was kept in place. No, I mean, it was more of a trial and error method. I mean, most of the times when you think of terms of introducing a new queen into a colony, that acceptance should occur within 7 days. So I tended to err on the side of what I thought was a longer time than would be needed. I mean, I don't think you'd really need a full 7 days for those queen pheromones from both sides to distribute, but I just kind of erred on the side of caution. There was a question in the back.
Yeah, so, sorry. As far as like building out so that you can put a full-size box on top.
Yes.
Could you, in theory, put a full-size deep on top, let them build up what they want to, and then take that?
Yes, you could. You could certainly do that. And I think that would end up being more of a trial and error in the field. One thing, especially with the hobby hive box, like I said, I've mentored a number of beekeepers and seen their frustrations in the field. So initially, I think there's a much more user-friendly approach in the field, where you're not having, especially getting into the brood boxes and checking on the health of the queens. If you can do that just by taking off your lids, I think that's very encouraging to new beekeepers. But you're completely right. I mean, you could go to another deep box on both sides and really increase that capacity for brood production. Yes.
What are your thoughts on pest and the disease spread between the colonies that are connected?
I didn't, in my limited study, I didn't see a great variation at all. Like I said, the one colony that I did lose totally was a Langstroth colony. I did have, in the migratory hive, I had one of the queens die before the honey harvest, but that was interesting in that it still kept that super colony approach. So even with one queen operating, that larger bee population still produced much greater amount of honey. So I thought that was interesting, and then that would give you time to go back in, if not during the nectar flow, afterwards, if you had a mated queen, to reintroduce and start that colony up again. But it did maintain that colony without the queen on the worker side, ended up fully functional and producing a great deal of honey. Yes, Omar.
When you remove the double stream and you set up the queen excluder, do you have any problem with queen losses or?
And like I said, in my study, I did lose one queen in one of the boxes, but the honey production, the hive still survived. I didn't notice any drop in worker population within that colony. So obviously they were adapted to the other queen's pheromones in that box and were still functioning well. So I think, that's part, I know when we're looking at our study, I think that would be interesting. I think it's essential to monitor what that speed of the population buildup, how that's impacting that honey production. So even the loss of that queen, I think it's imperative that we keep adding those honey supers so we get a clear indication of what that production advantage becomes. Yes, sir.
Are there any additional challenges when you introduce that new queen? The acceptance of the new queen, did you have any additional?
No, not afterwards. I introduced it after the honey flow had occurred in the commercial. Yeah. So I went back then go back to that solid panel. So you're kind of starting from scratch again. So let them be queenless, for at least 24 hours after that solid panel is reintroduced, and then kind of start that build up again following those steps. So once, she's built up and has a relatively strong colony on her half, then go back, and that first step being the double screen board and then the vertical queen excluder. Good question. Thank you. Yes, sir.
Do you use any lemongrass oil or anything to kind of get rid of that old smell of the queen in the box?
No, I didn't. Although that would probably be very beneficial. I didn't use that. No. Yeah, that's a good point. Yes, sir.
Can you speak to hive treatment, colony treatment? You mentioned the sugar and the pollen patties, but can you elaborate anything? Did you do mite treatments?
I did. This was done,
Any other
back in
treatments or what?
23. So I did experience mite loads. My threshold I was using was a mite count of 3. So I had used mite away quick strips in the spring, and then also I did oxalic acid in the winter.
And so that was just, you did all hives?
Yes, I was trying to just, yes, keep it beneficial, or, so you could look at that impact on honey. So once I determined, because my apiary, you saw that layout is relatively small. So once, one colony met that threshold for me, I treated all the colonies equally. And it was based on the brood boxes. So that's the amount of treatment that was used. Yes, Heather.
Did you see any level difference between the standard Langstroth hives versus?
Not noticeably, no. No, I really didn't. No, there wasn't anything that was really significant in the levels that I noticed. Another question in the back, sir.
So, it's an assumption that could be a completely wrong assumption. Since you have a 2-queen setup, I'm assuming you get to stay on top of swarm prevention pretty hard, and also if one does swarm, do they build a new the queen pheromones in one hive keep them from building a new queen?
Yeah, I didn't experience any swarm losses to that, but I did monitor that closely, because obviously, that brood production is occurring quickly. So I made sure that they had adequate space, once Once the frames were covered 70–80%, I was stacking, supers on, or in the commercial case, another brood box. Yes.
On your commercial setup, so there's a little less space between them, right?
Uh,
Were your brood
yep.
nests in each one of those centered? Were they skewed a direction? Was it random?
They started out in center, just, what you would expect really on a traditional Langstroth hive where they were developing. And again, initially when I was drawing these out, they were starting as 5-frame nukes. So positionally, I would have the feeder on the outer edges. So they were, building toward the center at that point. So I didn't notice any other really changes in their initial buildup. But you have to remember too that there was a solid panel there. So not a great deal, I don't know, pheromone transfer between that as compared to, having 2 3/4-inch pieces of wood side by side, how much pheromone transfer there may have been occurring before it was opened up or not. Yes, ma'am.
I have 2 questions. So, remind me again, what was the time frame of your research? When did you start and when did you end your research?
The actual, the honey was extracted and measured in 23. And then the actual buildup, I purchased the nukes the year prior to that. So I allowed 1 full calendar year for those hives to build up where they were ready to then produce honey for harvest.
And my next question is, within that time frame, that 1-year research, given the fact that hives have sort of different phases throughout the year and have different objectives, right? The bee hive mind. Would you say that a 2 queen colony setup would be more beneficial in the springtime or the fall to set up? Seeing that in the fall, they want to preserve their storage, they want to ensure that they survive the winter.
I think just, and it would still be a springtime for me doing that, just because you think in terms of that buildup initially, you want to make sure that there's optimum nectar flow, go through that natural process where that's where hives are going to be building up is in that spring and early summer.
Did you notice the behavior change at all within the hives in terms of the queens and the workers?
No, I didn't experience any, increase in aggression, if that's, no, they were very temperamental. They were pretty gentle bees. So no, I didn't experience that at all. Mm-hmm. Yes, sir.
Where do you go from here? Do you have patents?
This guy had gotten the patent in May, and I was hoping to have the patent by the commercial one by today. I texted my patent attorney last night, and he had one more claim to resolve. So he thought it'd be either today or by the end of the week. He said, if you don't want to fight hard for this one last claim, you've got your patent. But anyway, they're.
And then are you going to try to produce these?
No, I'm old. I'm not doing it. I'm not doing it for money. If it can help other beekeepers, great. I would love to see someone pick it up and run with it and develop it, because I think it has potential. But personally, I don't see myself starting a new company at the age of 66 and trying to, Yeah. No, I mean, I would love to see other people, encourage other people to at least try that. The old saying, you ask 5 beekeepers the same question and you get 10 different answers. I'm sure there are improvements that can be made on this, and I'd love to hear them. So I think additional research and work, but I would just ask that, everyone keep an open mind, because I think there is potential in the multi-queen system. Yes.
So 23, you gathered the honey.
Yes.
And that was the result.
Yeah.
Since then, have you continued to try to keep your statistics and keep analyzing?
No, I haven't been monitoring. Actually, I've been working more on the production side of more of the boxes, and working with Garrett and Heather and Omar. We're studying additional of the commercial concept. So hopefully we'll have some results by the end of next year or the following year. So it's more the research end versus, tracking in my scenario. I'd love to see it tried, and at least in other parts of the state too, just to get a reading, to see what's working, and then get, additional expert eyes on it. Yes, sir.
66 and nothing.
Well, thank you.
On your added frames to your notes, did they all start equally with foundation or drone cone? They were all the same?
Yes.
Have you thought about using different lines? I know we talked about this before.
I think that's a great idea.
Like a honey producer on one
Yeah.
side and a light resistance line on the other side.
Yeah, because that's,
Look aggressive,
you know,
aggressive.
and fight it out.
Aggressive
I might have to leave the double screen board in and the whole time, but you know, I think it has a, yeah, I think there's a lot of potential. You know, we discussed that. And I think that's a great idea. You know, initially I was looking at it kind of following up on Farrar just in terms of honey potential, because I think that would be the biggest hook for most beekeepers. But if you could combine, you know, different traits, it's like doing a magic, doing it.
Lines, they produce less honey than a commercial line.
Right.
So if you can make up for that with the Italian stock.
Yeah.
It'd be less resistant, but you have the bees from the other side coming in and take care of the mites.
Yeah, exactly. So.
Yeah, you keep it a messy house over there.
Yeah. Bring in the cleaners, yeah. All great questions. And like I said, this is my, well, I wouldn't say my first attempt. If you saw some of the initial concepts I'd had, I'd be laughed out of the room. But this one's working pretty well. Yes, sir.
What will your 3 boxes weigh?
My 3 boxes weigh?
Yeah, your setup, your initial bottom set, what?
Oh.
You're talking about labor and management, what will that weigh?
Well, fortunately, you know, starting out with this one conceptually, you don't have all of these frames in initially. So by keeping, you know, the divider panels in place, you'd be looking at an equivalent weight of, you know, 2 deep boxes that are filled, and then the wooden outline for this third center box. Yeah, it does, but once it's in place, you're not having to really deal with that. You're not moving it. You're not having to unstack it, but it is an initial labor setup, yes. So, I mean, the empty box itself, you put in place on the standard bottom boards. You know, this frame, I would guess, probably weighs, without any of the foundation, it may be 20 to 30 pounds without any frames or, you know, covers on it. So I think it would still be manageable in the field for the initial setup. Yes, ma'am.
Related to that, have you considered going to some of these companies like HMA or some of the lighter weight insulated plastic items and asking, because that would reduce?
Yeah, I mean, that's a good thought. Looking at mainly upfront cost for hobby folks, you know, those more exotic materials, and from an architectural background, they drive the price up pretty high. So, you know, if you can stay with the standard stuff, but that is a potential. I mean, that may be another alternative available if someone feels challenged by, you know, the cumbersomeness or the weight of a initial base.
So you're putting the whole thing out there, and then you're starting to produce your honey. So you have honey supers on the outside, right?
No, initially just the center. That was one of the questions earlier. You know, can you do brood boxes on it? And yes, you could. Yeah, you could go 2 doubles, and then you'd end up, you know, with the additional 10 here and 8 mediums. Now, you know, it would be interesting. Yes, the queen excluder fits over the top. So, you know, and I think, you know, in theory, if you think about it, if you were to go the double deeps, I don't know, and it'd be an interesting field experiment to try. I don't know that it would reap the benefits of creating that superorganism versus kind of 2 siloed approaches. So in terms of how the overall colony functioned, I don't know if you'd receive the same benefit of having kind of that one superorganism, which you're encouraging with this initial horizontal development. But it'd be worth studying. I mean, there's a lot of variables that, and it's great to hear other suggestions on the approach.
Everybody's always worried about putting
excludes honey. They won't go through it to start storing honey up there. Did you?
I've never had that. I've always used it even on my standard Langstrasse. I've never encountered an issue with that, but that's me. It could be an issue for people, but
They're gonna crawl through there, put it up there.
yeah, yeah. Yes, sir.
You spoke on the behavioral traits that you had noticed, what they didn't notice previously. Did you notice anything as from an observation point as far as their overall harmonious production value in the hive? Did they look like they seemed to know what they were doing right off the bat when introducing this, or did it seem like there was a learning curve?
I guess in all honesty, I hadn't thought to monitor and record that, but it didn't stick out in my mind of seeing anything, that was a delayed or a hesitation in the colony's development, once that they were introduced to each other. I mean, I think it was pretty simultaneous in terms of that development. I didn't see any downside to it.
Looks pretty impressive with the numbers too.
Yeah, but again, that could be, it's such a small sample size. That's why I hesitate to even, make it available for, for common consumption. I'd rather get other studies involved and make sure it's a viable solution. But I just was intrigued by Farrar's study and wanted to see if it would hold water. And I think it definitely does. It has the opportunity to be a potential game changer. Any other questions?
All right, thank you.
All right, you're welcome.